I have loved Julian Croft for a full decade. He was naturally aloof, but he never objected to our engagement. I thought he was willing, too. Until that day, I rushed through a downpour to bring him his stomach medicine. I happened to find the daughter of a partner company persuading him to drink. I stepped forward to stop it, but he said with contempt, "Do you really think you're the young lady of the Croft family? Mind your own business." In the noisy bar, my tears mingled with the rain. Julian Croft, from this day forward, your business is no longer my business. The lights of the bar crisscrossed. I clutched the stomach medicine in my hand, my entire body numb with cold. The playful and disdainful gazes of those around me fell upon me. But what stung the most was Julian's impatient expression. He had a weak stomach and had to take medicine after every meal, or he would get a stomachache. I had called him several times just now with no answer, so I had to ask around to find out where the party was. As I was getting close, a torrential downpour began. It was rush hour, and a 500-meter journey was projected to take half an hour. I was in a hurry to get Julian his medicine, so I ran through the rain. In the dim light, Sienna was leaning against Julian's chest, coquettishly feeding him a drink. The man who usually disliked physical contact with others was now letting the young woman in his arms do as she pleased. When I pushed the door open, her glass was just touching Julian's lips. An indescribable intimacy. A wave of sorrow washed over me, but what came to mind was the image of Julian, pale with pain. During one of his stomach episodes, the words tumbled out of my mouth. "He can't drink." The crowd fell silent. I instinctively looked down at my mud-stained black leather shoes, which were creating a small puddle on the floor. A sudden wave of embarrassment washed over me. But what embarrassed me more was Julian's reply. He leaned back on the sofa and clicked his tongue. "Do you really think you're the young lady of the Croft family? Mind your own business." Without even looking at me, he tilted his head back and down the whiskey in his glass. The words I had been about to say were caught in my throat. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. I could only desperately hold back my tears, trying not to look so pathetic. Seeing this, the others tactfully averted their gazes, treating me as if I were invisible. They carefully walked around me. One girl, who couldn't bear to watch, handed me a dry towel, but she was immediately pulled away by her companion. "Why are you bothering with her?" The rain from my hair dripped down endlessly. The past flashed before my eyes, scene by scene. I suddenly understood. Julian didn't object to our marriage, not because he was willing, but because he simply didn't care. He didn't care about the agreement between his mother and my grandmother, and he didn't care about me. To put it more bluntly, it was disdain. Because of his disdain, he would remain silent when others said I wasn't good enough for him. Because of his disdain, all my concern, in his eyes, was just meddling, embarrassment, grievance, and anger intertwined, finally dissolving into a strange calm. I slowly dried my hair and quietly placed the stomach medicine on the table. I took one last look at Julian. Then I left the bar without looking back. The lights of the Croft family mansion were still on. Mrs. Croft and a few friends were sitting in the living room, drinking tea. As I stood at the entrance changing my shoes, I could clearly hear their conversation. "Isabel, you're not really going to let Julian marry that little housekeeper's girl, are you? If you ask me, you're just being too superstitious. It's normal for children to get sick. Look at Julian now. He's grown up and perfectly healthy, isn't he?" The speaker was Mrs. Croft's best friend. Ever since Julian and I were engaged, she had found fault with me at every turn. She had said such things not just behind my back, but to my face as well. Mrs. Croft sighed. "That girl, Stella, has had a hard life. She takes very good care of Julian. When it's time for him to get married, I'll compensate her." Tears streamed down my face. I bit my lower lip hard, suddenly remembering the way Mrs. Croft had cried and begged me not to leave all those years ago. Julian had been frail since he was a child. When he was 14, he had fallen seriously ill. In her desperation, Mrs. Croft had consulted a famous Taoist priest, and the priest had chosen me. He said I had a rare birth chart that would bring good fortune to my husband, and that if we were engaged, Julian's health would improve. And just like that, I went from being an orphan adopted by the Croft family's housekeeper to Julian's fiancé. Julian had always been cold to me. If I greeted him, he would pretend not to see me. If I secretly looked at him, he would frown and turn away. Once, he had to leave early for something I didn't know, and I didn't dare go to his classroom to find him. I could only wait at the school gate. I waited and waited, until it was dark and the school was empty. Only then did I walk back to the Crofts, crying. That day, I thought for a long time and finally mustered the courage to talk to Mrs. Croft about breaking off the engagement. But Mrs. Croft cried and begged me not to be angry with Julian. She even listed many things to prove that Julian liked me too. I still remember some of her words. Stella, Julian is a child who doesn't know how to express his feelings. He may not say it, but in his heart, he can't live without you. If he didn't like you, why would he go to school with you every day? Why doesn't he talk to other girls? And why doesn't he object to this marriage? Because of those words, I endured Julian's cold gaze. Year after year, Mrs. Croft treated me better and better. Sometimes, I would secretly imagine her as my own mother. But illusions are meant to be broken. While I was trying my best to learn how to be a good wife and a good daughter, they had already unilaterally declared my sentence. I had lived in this house for 10 years, but at that moment, I didn't know if I should go inside. On the dark street, I called my college roommate. Maya, that job offer in America you mentioned, is it still available? When I returned to the Crofts, the tea party was over. Mrs. Croft's face fell when she saw I was alone, and her tone was accusatory. Stella, why didn't you bring Julian back with you? As if I had deliberately left him behind. But she knew very well that no one could control Julian. In the past, her words would have hurt me, but more than that, they would have made me anxious. I was always afraid of doing something wrong and making her angry. But now, I just calmly stated the facts. He didn't want to come back. You should have persuaded him. You know he's not well. Who is he with? Why didn't you wait for him there? I lowered my eyes, not wanting to argue. Just his usual friends. And Sienna. Hearing Sienna's name, Mrs. Croft's expression instantly softened. Oh, Sienna was there. Then, as if remembering something, she frowned at me. I knew what she was thinking. She was afraid my presence would upset Sienna. I didn't react with my usual anxiety and submissiveness. I changed my shoes and went to my room to pack. I didn't have many things at the Crofts. What needed to be thrown away was thrown away. What needed to be discarded was discarded. The rest just barely fit into a 28-inch suitcase. There was only one thing I didn't know what to do with. It was a small teddy bear wearing a brown dress. Julian had given it to me the day my grandmother died. The young man had gently pulled me into his arms, his voice low and hoarse. Stella, don't be sad. I'll take care of you from now on. A hug and a promise born of pity. Yet I had mistaken it for proof that Julian felt something special for me. The bear stared at me with its button eyes, as if mocking my one-sided love. I had originally thought of giving it back to Julian, but then I reconsidered. Even if I did, given his personality, he would probably just toss it in the trash without a second thought. I barely slept a wink. I went downstairs early in the morning with my things. Julian was eating breakfast. He glanced at the bundle in my arms, a flicker of doubt in his eyes, but he said nothing, as indifferent as ever. It was Mrs. Croft who asked, "Where are you going?" "Nowhere. Just getting rid of some things I don't need." Before I could finish, Julian's phone rang. He answered, said a few words, and stood up to get dressed. Something came up at the company. "I have to go," Mrs. Croft reminded him. "Drive safely." No one cared about my answer anymore. I gave a self-deprecating laugh and went outside to call a taxi. The Crofts had a driver, but I never used one. I paid for my tuition and living expenses by working part-time jobs. It was my way of maintaining my pitiful pride in front of Julian, as if by not taking advantage of the Crofts, I could face him with a little more confidence. In the most bustling mall in the city, the lights were dazzling. I stood at a counter, thinking of buying a brooch for Maya as a gift. A familiar voice came from behind me, tinged with a coquettish tone. "Julian, doesn't this necklace look perfect on me?" I instinctively turned my head. The tall, aloof man and the charming young woman stood together. Anyone would say they were a perfect match. I only glanced at them, and my eyes met Julian's. There was a hint of impatience in his eyes. "What are you doing here?" I knew he suspected I was following him. When he was in high school, He would go out with his friends every weekend to relax. Mrs. Croft would worry and ask me to go with him. But those young masters and Mrs. didn't like me. I didn't dare to refuse Mrs. Croft, so I would always follow them secretly. When Julian found me, I would just look down, mumbling, not knowing what to say. But now, I pointed to the sales assistant who was wrapping my purchase and said calmly, "I'm here to buy a gift for Maya. I'm leaving now." Julian looked at me with a frown, disbelieving. But I didn't linger, didn't say anything more. From beginning to end, it was as if I had just run into a knot. So, familiar acquaintance at the mall. Back at the house, I knocked on Mrs. Croft's door. After all, I had lived with the Crofts for so many years. It was only right that I say goodbye. When I told her I was going to work in America, she stammered, "America? Then what about you and Julian's marriage?" It was a childhood joke. It doesn't count. Hearing this, Mrs. Croft feigned a complaint, but her face showed a look of relief. "You child, how could you make such a big decision without telling us? But since you've decided, so be it. You're both grown up now. I can't interfere in your romantic affairs. When are you leaving?" Looking at Mrs. Croft, a wave of bitterness rose in my heart. Not for anyone else, but for my past self. Tomorrow morning. So soon. This time, Mrs. Croft was genuinely shocked, because tomorrow was her birthday. And every year on her birthday, I would prepare a surprise for her and cook a feast. Mrs. Croft would hug me and joke, "My daughter-in-law is the most thoughtful. That brat Julian has never cooked for me." I paused for a moment, then continued, "I won't be attending your birthday party tomorrow. I don't want to cause any misunderstandings." We both knew what kind of misunderstandings she was worried about. She thought about it, her expression complex, and hesitated for a long time without speaking. I took her silence as agreement. The next day, I timed my descent downstairs perfectly. Julian was leaning against the sofa, carefully instructing the butler on the party arrangements. His dark hair fell across his forehead, giving the usually composed man a touch of youthfulness. Sienna, in a white formal dress, was leaning against the arm of the sofa. The two were so close they were almost touching. My suitcase was heavy and clattered against the marble stairs. The few people in the living room stopped what they were doing and looked at me. "Sorry." I gave a polite smile and tried to lift the suitcase higher. Julian took a few steps forward and pointed at my suitcase. "What are you doing?" His expression was still cold, as if he were asking about something trivial. If the noise hadn't disturbed him, and if it wasn't his mother's birthday, he probably wouldn't have even bothered to ask. I didn't want to say much to him, so I gave a vague answer. "I have some work to take care of. I'll be out for a few days." Julian took a step closer, his expression cold. "Today is my mother's birthday. It's urgent. I've already spoken with Mrs. Croft." I tried to walk past him, but he stood in my way, exuding an aura of displeasure. "When will you be back?" "I won't be back." The words were on the tip of my tongue, but I didn't know how to say them. It wasn't the right time or place for such a conversation. It was Sienna who spoke up with a smile. "Don't you make longevity noodles for Mrs. Croft every year? Julian said a few words to you the other day, and now you're deliberately skipping her birthday. People who don't know might think the Croft family did something to you." I pretended not to hear her, grabbed my suitcase, and quickly walked past the two of them. But Julian wouldn't let me go. He grabbed my wrist. The air was thick with a suffocating pressure, as if the temperature had suddenly dropped. Julian's voice was low and cold, every word laced with disdain. "You're an amateur designer. What kind of urgent business could you possibly have? Just because I didn't give you face at the bar the other day, you're making such a big deal out of it." My steps faltered. So Julian knew that his actions would make me lose face, would embarrass me. He just assumed I wouldn't get angry, so he acted without restraint. I turned my head and looked at him seriously, my voice low but loud enough for him to hear. "Yes, it is a big deal." "What?" Julian's breath caught for a moment, followed by a long silence. Only when I stepped out the door did he finally speak. "If you're leaving, then go by yourself. Don't use the Croft family's driver." It was pouring rain outside. The housekeeper, Mary, saw the tense atmosphere and came over to mediate. "Miss, it's raining so hard outside. If you really have to go, you should at least wait for the rain to stop." She didn't know I was going to America. She didn't know I couldn't wait for the rain to stop. Julian's voice grew even colder. Mary, don't try to persuade her. Mary was so anxious she was on the verge of tears, muttering, "Such a heavy rain. You'll get sick if you get wet." A lump formed in my throat. I whispered a few words in Mary's ear, and she finally let go of my hand. Julian didn't know that I had never used anyone from the Croft family. The car I had called for was already at the gate. As I walked out, I could still hear Mary making one last effort. "Young master, miss, she's really gone." Julian's reply was emotionless, but his words were as hurtful as ever. "Let her go. Just don't come crying back to me." The Crofts' house was close to the airport. After checking in, I still had a few hours to spare. I found a restaurant and started looking at design sketches. Maya had everything ready on her end. She was just waiting for me to arrive to start designing the first collection. I was hunched over my tablet, sketching, my mind already drifting to life in California. A life where I didn't have to watch anyone's expression, where I wasn't on call 24/7 as a personal assistant. A life that was truly my own. A shadow suddenly fell over me. I was just working on the lace detail of a cuff and looked up impatiently. "Excuse me, could you please move?" What met my eyes was Julian's furious face. He stood before me, his hands in his trouser pockets, his damp hair clinging to his forehead, giving him a slightly disheveled look. "Stella, have you had enough of your tantrum?" I was momentarily speechless. So, in Julian's eyes, not attending his mother's birthday party, not meekly accepting his cold words as I had before, was a tantrum. A wave of helplessness washed over me. I didn't answer his question, but asked one of my own. "How am I throwing a tantrum? I already told you I have work to do, and I already cleared it with Mrs. Croft." Julian sneered, the rain dripping from his unruly eyebrows down his jawline. "My mother is so good to you. Of course she wouldn't object. She's in your room crying right now." Before, at the bar, "It was my fault. I apologize." All right. My pen stopped. I keenly picked up on the key words in Julian's sentence. "Mrs. Croft was crying. So you came to get me to go back. Does she know?" "No. If she knew, she would never force you." As if to prove his point, Sienna's call came through. "Julian, Aunt Isabel said if Stella doesn't want to come back, then let it be. Don't make things difficult for her." On the other end of the line, I could hear a chorus of voices. "Isabel, you're just too kind. The Crofts have provided her with food and shelter, and this is how she repays them. Leaving without even a word. I think she's just playing hard to get, thinking the Crofts can't live without her. If you ask me, that Taoist priest from back then was probably a fraud her grandmother hired." Yeah. How could something so miraculous happen in this world? For all we know, the old housekeeper was the one who made the young master sick in the first place. My heart felt like it had been plunged into an icy abyss. I stood there, trembling, waiting for Mrs. Croft's reply. After several long minutes, as the gossiping had already moved on to whether I was sneaking into beds at night, Mrs. Croft finally spoke. She said, "No matter what Stella has done, in my heart, she will always be my daughter." She didn't defend me, didn't stop the others' malicious speculations. Instead, with that one sentence, she confirmed all those ridiculous rumors. Every word was a stab to the heart. The last glimmer of hope in my heart was finally extinguished in that moment. I looked up and stared at Julian. "I'll go back with you." In the black Bentley, Julian's expression remained cold. Seeing me staring silently out the window, he offered a condescending comfort. "If you go back and apologize now, Mom will forgive you. The Crofts know what kind of person you and your grandmother are. You don't need to take what others say to heart." A wave of helplessness washed over me. He was always like this. Just as I was on the verge of a breakdown, about to lose my mind, he would calmly say, "Don't take it to heart," as if I were the one being unreasonable. But Julian wasn't the one being slandered. Of course, he didn't have to take it to heart. The car stopped steadily at the Crofts' gate. I didn't wait for Julian. I strode towards my room. Mrs. Croft was still sitting on my bed, crying, surrounded by a circle of wealthy women comforting her. Bang! The door slammed against the wall. When Mrs. Croft saw me, a flicker of panic crossed her eyes. "Stella, why are you back?" I threw my bag on the floor, a dull ache in my heart. "I'm back. Aren't you happy?" Her best friend immediately stepped forward. "Stella, what kind of attitude is that? Is that how you speak to your elders? Elders. I gave a bitter laugh. I'm an orphan. I only had a grandmother. And she passed away a few years ago. Which elder are you referring to? Mrs. Shaw stood there, stunned. Her face flushed with anger. She never expected the Stella who used to just bow her head and apologize when scolded would talk back to her like this. But the Crofts were never short on sycophants. A younger woman in the crowd spoke up. Miss, everything you eat, wear, and use is provided by the Croft family, a housekeeper's granddaughter. If it weren't for the Crofts, where would you get the money to study design? Everything you have today was given to you by the Crofts. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say Mrs. Croft is your second mother. Others chimed in agreement. It was then that Julian arrived. Seeing the tense atmosphere between me and his mother, his eyes were as cold as ice. Stella, what is the meaning of this? I looked away. I thought I had let it go, but my heart still ached uncontrollably. These were the people I once thought of as family. No meaning. It just seems like everyone has some misunderstandings about me. I wanted to clarify. Julian was still frowning at me. Stella, is there anything wrong with what they said? What do you have to clarify? I didn't look at him. I said calmly. Firstly, my tuition and living expenses have nothing to do with the Croft family. Someone laughed out loud. Nothing to do with the Croft family. Did she earn it herself? Mrs. Croft also looked at me with a pained expression. Stella, I know you care about your pride, but you were engaged to Julian before. No one would say anything if you used his money for tuition. Her expression was calm, but her eyes held a hint of displeasure. As for what she was displeased about, it was, of course, that I had tactlessly returned to the Crofts and caused a scene at the party. I looked at Julian with a smile. Mr. Croft, your mother said it's fine for me to use your money for tuition. What do you say? Of course it's fine, Julian answered reflexively. But halfway through, he looked up sharply. Mom, weren't you responsible for Stella's school expenses? So that was it. Mother and son both thought I was taking advantage of the other. No wonder they both treated me with such a condescending attitude. The other guests also grew restless, exchanging glances. Everyone present was a seasoned player in the business world. Seeing the reaction of the Croft mother and son, what else was there to misunderstand? Only Mrs. Croft's best friend, Mrs. Shaw, was still on the offensive. Tuition and living expenses are small matters. You've lived in the Crofts for so many years. Your food, clothing, and shelter. Which one wasn't Isabel worried about? I ignored her aggressive tone and continued. Secondly, if we're really going to settle accounts, it should be the Croft family that owes me. Before I was 18, I lived in my own home. After my grandmother passed away when I was 18, I moved into the Crofts. Mrs. Shaw seemed to have found a weak point. That's 5 or 6 years. You lived in a villa in the most expensive area of the city, eating food flown in from all over the world every day, not to mention how much you've seen of the world. Just the room and board alone would be enough for you to repay. And you have the nerve to say the Crofts owe you. Someone else chimed in. Yes, there are dorms at the university. She still commuted between the school and the Crofts every day. She must have thought the dorms were too shabby. Hearing this, Mrs. Croft's expression softened slightly, while Julian stared at my face, lost in thought. I looked at the person who had spoken and smiled faintly. My grandmother was Julian's housekeeper, but after she passed away, the Crofts never hired a new one. Guess who took over her work? You don't ask a live-in housekeeper to pay rent, do you? The room fell silent. Some people also remembered my past at the Crofts. Yes, the young lady worked hard. I heard the Croft boy was not in good health and was a picky eater. She would get up at 5 every morning to make porridge. I also heard from my son that Julian didn't do any chores at school. It was always Stella who was busy with everything. Didn't Isabel say she treated her like a daughter? Is this how she treats her own daughter? Mrs. Croft's just softened expression darkened again. I tossed my hair and prepared to continue. Thirdly, enough. Julian, who had been silent all this time, suddenly broke the silence. Stella, come with me. We need to talk. I sat in my chair, a throbbing pain in my heart. Talk about what? I had known Julian for 14 years. I had wanted to have a serious talk with him countless times, but all he ever gave me was a cold back. Now he wanted to talk. Too bad. There was no chance. I continued on my own. Thirdly, Those of you who suspect my grandmother of deliberately arranging a fake marriage can save your breath. I told Mrs. Croft yesterday. My engagement with Julian is off. Mrs. Croft. Isn't that right? Mrs. Croft's face was pale. Her usually dignified and noble face now showed a hint of desperation. The room was silent. The guests also left, one by one, under Mrs. Shaw's urging glances. Only the three of us remained in the room. Julian's face was pale, his voice trembling slightly. Stella, what you just said, you were just angry, right? I didn't answer. I glanced at him and turned towards the door. The driver was already waiting outside. I walked quickly, leaving Julian's calls far behind. Let's go. Sir. Stella. Don't go. The moment the door closed, a well-defined hand squeezed through. A low, muffled grunt came from outside the car. Are you insane? I instinctively let go of the door. Julian's palm was bruised purple, but he seemed to feel no pain, still holding the car door firmly. Seeing me stare at his hand, Julian gave a bitter smile, a sick obsession in his eyes. Stella. Like this. Are you a little less angry? The only answer he got was the loud slam of the car door. In the rearview mirror, Julian's smile froze on his face, his figure growing smaller and smaller. He didn't chase after me. He just stood there, like a statue being washed by the rain. Life in California was far more pleasant than I had imagined. Maya and I opened a clothing design studio together. Under the setting sun, we would lie on the beach, admiring the eight-pack abs of handsome men, under the guise of studying human anatomy. I just never expected Julian to find me here. At the studio entrance, a man in a black suit leaned against the wall, his face cool, drawing frequent glances from passing girls. Seeing me, he quickly extinguished the cigarette in his hand, his voice hoarse. Stella. Long time no see. It hadn't been that long. It had only been a month since we had last seen each other. I didn't answer and walked straight past him. Julian grabbed my shoulder, his eyes full of anxiety and regret. Stella, give me a chance to explain. Things are not what you think. I was curious to hear what kind of explanation Julian would give me. In the studio, Julian looked around at my work, his expression complex. Stella, did you design all of these? Can I cut him off. Get to the point. Julian was a little embarrassed, but seeing my impatient expression, he didn't dare to say anything else. After a long pause, he finally spoke slowly. Stella, at the bar that day, it was indeed my fault, but that was because Sienna was there. You know, my father's car accident back then was very suspicious. There were rumors that the Shaw family was behind it, but because there was no evidence, it was eventually treated as a traffic accident. I got close to Sienna to see if I could find a way in through her. Julian rambled on, from his first meeting with Sienna, to how he got the evidence to bring down the Shaw family, to how he kept the truth from me to protect me. But gradually, his voice grew softer, because he realized that there was no trace of emotion on my face. Stella, what's wrong? My expression was calm, but the words I spoke were like a thunderclap in Julian's ears. I know everything you're talking about. I wasn't a fool. After so many years at the Crofts, I knew some things even better than Julian himself. I knew the obsession that had haunted Julian for years. I saw the gloom in his eyes when he was with Sienna. I always understood that Julian would have a fight to the death with the Shaw family. The one who didn't understand was Julian. He stared at me, his pupils slightly constricted, as if he couldn't believe what he had just heard. Stella, what did you say? I took a deep breath, unwilling to relive those painful memories. Julian, the person who made me want to leave wasn't Sienna. It was you. I did like you, but all you ever gave me was day after day of cold indifference. I also thought, if you didn't refuse, then maybe my love could move you one day. But that day at the bar, you made me realize something. Even if we did get married, I wouldn't be happy. Because the biggest problem between us wasn't that you didn't love me, but that you didn't respect me at all. That's not it. Julian's face turned pale. He weakly refuted. Stella, no, that's not it. I just don't know how to love someone. You don't know how to love someone. Or you don't know how to love someone of a lower status. Someone who would make your love for them a shameful thing. For so many years, I had lived in anxiety under Julian's cold indifference. But every time I wanted to give up, I would waver at a crumb of affection he threw my way, falling into a deeper self-doubt. Until that day, standing in the bar, tasting the saltiness of my tears, I had a sudden epiphany. He did love me, and in public. He was furious at himself for loving someone like me. Maya and I continued to work during the day and go to the beach to study. In the evening, Julian had moved in nearby. He would wait at the studio entrance every day, not daring to come in, just following us from a distance when Maya and I went out. Sometimes, when he saw us chatting happily, he would tentatively try to interject a few dry words. Seeing my face immediately turn cold, he would silently retreat to the side. On the beach, the tide came in, wave after wave. The lights of the Santa Monica Pier in the distance began to twinkle. Maya raised an eyebrow and gestured. Stella, look at him. He looks so pitiful. I followed her gaze. Julian was sitting alone on the steps, his back looking particularly frail in the twilight. Noticing my gaze, he forced a fawning smile. He did look pitiful, but compared to the years of coldness and scorn I had endured, what was this? Suddenly, his smile froze, his pupils contracting sharply. Bang! A sharp gunshot pierced the tranquility. The crowd began to stir. Stella. A familiar voice tore through the air. I turned my head in a daze and saw Julian running towards me with all his might. He landed heavily on top of me. A strong smell of blood filled the air. Warm liquids soaked through my shirt. Julian. I tried to get up to check his injuries, but he held me down. Don't move. His voice was very soft, but his hands were surprisingly strong. Stella, don't get up. It's not safe yet. The smell of disinfectant in the hospital was pungent. I looked at Julian lying in the hospital bed. My feelings a complicated mess. Have something to drink. Maya handed me a cup of coffee and sat down in the chair next to me, hesitating. Stella, you and Julian. Maybe you should have another talk. I looked down at my shoes, the scene on the beach flashing before my eyes. Maya, you know what? When Julian jumped on me, I felt gratitude, fear, and surprise. But I took a deep breath. The one thing I didn't feel was heartache. In the past, forget getting shot. If he just scraped his hand playing ball, I would have been heartbroken. Maya, we really can't go back. Before I could finish, there was a soft sound from the hospital room. I instinctively looked at the bed. Julian had woken up at some point and was staring straight at me, his eyes full of tears. He opened his mouth, as if to say something, but only a choked sob came out. Julian. I started to speak, but I didn't know if I should thank him first or tell him that it was impossible between us. Julian raised a hand to stop me, a smile more painful than crying on his face. Stella, promise me one thing. When you get married, don't send me an invitation. The room was terrifyingly quiet, only the beeping of the monitor echoing. Julian turned his head to look out the window. After a long time, his hoarse voice spoke again. Stella, we're even. My family will be here soon. You should go. I looked at his pale face, stunned for a moment. Your injury. No matter what. You saved me. Go. Julian cut me off, his voice trembling slightly. Let me be alone for a while. I took one last look at him, pushed open the door, and walked away without looking back.